2018. This is number 15. This is a take 2 because the first time I did it, I simply talked about a tricky RPG situation. It's not necessarily one I enjoyed. I may still post that because it was an experience that I think I should share. But this one is number 15, the real answer, a tricky situation, RPG situation that I have enjoyed. What do they mean by tricky? Tricky to me is difficult or challenging. If it's difficult, it's not very enjoyable. And I've had some difficult situations to deal with, as my other video will attest to. But tricky that are enjoyable, one comes to mind, and it was a situation, but it was a long-term situation. In an environment in the campaign. I refer to my magnum opus, best campaign I've ever had, longest, most intense campaign I've ever had. I never expect to ever experience something like that again. Was in Star Wars D6 under the Dark Strider campaign series. Perhaps one of the most ambitious campaign boxes ever made that I have ever experienced. I decided to take it on. And not only take it on, but completely modify it and add even more complexity to it. I really thought it was going to be my last Star Wars campaign, so I integrated a lot of other elements of stuff I hadn't gotten into yet. It turns out it wasn't my last campaign, but it was massive. I had an average of 6 to 8 players each day, and each player playing 3 characters on average, some playing 4, representing an entire crew of a New Republic ship, starting from the top down. So first layer of the characters people played were pre-gened officers, and we had the captain, we had the first mate, all that stuff, engineer, very Star Trek-y kind of structure. And in the middle were crewmen on board, and those were pre-generated. And in the final layer were characters they created, and they acted as away teams and stuff like that. It was tricky on many levels. Tricky was the level of complexity the campaign itself was. So many players, so many characters, so many plot lines. Here I am, adding more intrigue and more mistrust and more plot to the overall campaign. But it was the mistrust and intrigue that I found really enjoyable. I really liked the mistrust within the party. They automatically inserted that in with one character who was a former Imperial that was a little shady. And also a criminal guy with at least 2 characters with criminal backgrounds. Brilliant. And I had given those characters to players that played them to the hilt. And this was during a time when World of Darkness was hot, and intrigue plots, and factions and all that were the craze. I ended up tapping some World of Darkness players who knew how to play intrigue, keep it within the game. But the problem is some others didn't like it, and or struggled with it. They necessarily didn't like it, but didn't like the air of mistrust that was in the room on a regular basis. But I thrived on it, and I poked on it, and it came to a head when the one person the captain thought he could trust, it was a she, but he was played by a he. The one person he thought he could trust, the first mate, or the executive officer, however you want to call it, he finds out that he was bugging the entire ship, keeping an eye on people. And the captain didn't even know about it. Even his own quarters. He was on the trust no one bandwagon. And I gave him intel on everybody based on those bugs. And that day he found out the whole ship was bugged by his executive officer was the day he was in total shock and frustration. But it was all in game for the most part. He still refers back to that he couldn't believe his good friend in real life and a supposed good friend in the game did that to him. So and there were times off and on that I had to talk people down because they got way too into it. The campaign remained tricky all the way to the end. I toned down some of the intrigue as it went on. There are 3 layers to the campaign, starting with the box set and then I think there were 2 supplements afterwards that continued the campaign. And so the box set dealt with the core worlds of this particular sector, which was still an outlying or outer rim sector. So, when I say core, it's relative to where they're at. So, kind of the hub of civilization for this outer rim sector. And then it goes out further to more wilder areas. And then across a rift, on the other side of this rift was even more mysterious and alien worlds. So the intrigue and the mistrust and storylines of that nature were mostly in the core because you were dealing with factions and stuff like that. And as it became more alien and more exploratory, the trust, although soured, began to settle a little bit better, and they began to see the enemy for who it was, and they were able to focus on the enemy rather than mistrust within the ship. So I still think it was brilliantly designed. I may have ramped it up a little bit with my additions, and I tended to prod the group with mistrust, but it just kind of grew naturally because of the backgrounds of the pre-generated characters. I don't necessarily get the notion that an entire party has to be united. That shows me that you all are just one person, one character. I don't necessarily think that that's true to life. I don't think that that's necessarily something that creates good story. Conflict creates good story, and it may be personal conflict, it may be social conflict, but expect some kind of conflict in my game. I mean, between characters, that is. It does take a lot of work to create the interpersonal conflict between characters, mistrust, because it has to be directly linked to the setting or to the campaign. Or, it has to matter, and there has to be a link to the stakes. So there you go. Tricky situation. I'll admit, I really enjoyed it, much to many of their chagrins. Some enjoyed it, some kind of wanted to not deal with it because it felt like true life drama, but it really emulated an entire crew. They're not all of the same mind, they're not all robots. They all have different backgrounds and different motivations. So it played out the way it was supposed to, as far as I'm concerned. So hopefully that was entertaining. Until next time, seek the wolf in thyself.